Many companies have said this is public, and they've reported it on their website, etc., is genuinely in a digital form that is comparable. Now, there's a bottom-up way to that as well. I mentioned in the session the example of WikiRate. So that's like a Wikipedia, but for data on social, environmental, and governance sort of issues, and where anyone from the public can put in the data of a company, or a company itself, or indeed an NGO, and you can start to compare and contrast that. So that was one thing. The other thing is, it seems to me that what's missing now on the data still is the product level. So we've got a lot of corporate data, but for it to make sense on circular economy, it has to be product. So how can we get the equivalent innovation of bringing down the cost of analyzing the data we need at a product level? We're basically talking about like life cycle assessment. So we've had a few companies commit to doing LCA on their products, and then they do it for like a dozen products. They find out it's so damn expensive and complicated that they give up, and so we never get the full data on the products, even though they were willing to do it. So how do you get the digital innovators to say, okay, we've come up with an algorithm or something like that that can, a little bit like we have with the genome, can quickly sequence your genome, and the cost comes down very, very quickly. So that was one thought. I don't know if it's a good time also to mention my other thing that would be interesting. If you weren't in the session, I mentioned that since you're all interested in circular economy, next week the world's first feature-length documentary on circular economy comes out on Amazon. So have a look for that if you're interested. I was involved with it, and we filmed various cases in Europe, but also in Latin America and in Africa. And part of that is saying, we made it for the public, not for the circular economy expert. How do you make it a story that people can engage with, that even poor people can engage with in developing countries? So that was just to mention that. The other is that at Antwerp Management School, where I'm professor, we've set up corporate leaders groups to work on these issues, and we've got one on exponential economy, which is digital economy. So any companies that are interested in working in this agenda, let me know. And we've got another one on circular economy, and in both cases, what they will be looking at is the interface between circular and digital, exactly what we've been talking about. So we're inviting companies at this stage to participate.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Feedback from the audience? No? Do you wish to come back to any of the issues that have been raised? Otherwise, I'll be happy to wrap up the session and put perhaps one concluding question to the speakers. No? In that case, as we move forward with the project, and we've been looking at partnerships, we've been looking at innovative business models next. What do you think? I think that's Paul, what you mentioned, I think that it's very important, and I think we'd be happy to take that on board. A call for urgency, because we see that on the circular economy side, we see that on the digital side. So yes, we want to make sure that this project also contributes to that in raising the awareness that this needs to happen now, and that there's much more that can be done just by understanding what's already out there, the policy framework, the instruments, etc. What are the linkages to the different agendas? But so, question to you: are there specific areas what you would like us to look into on the basis of the discussions that you had today? And do you feel that there were gaps that we would need to address in the course of the project in order to ensure that we also add up to the urgency and answer some of the questions that remain to be answered?
Perhaps I go first. I would make two suggestions. One is a rather specific one. I think it's not bad that people clarify a little bit what the new technologies will bring. I mean, there's some talk around blockchain, so what does it now actually bring? And that's probably good to have that as part of actual reporting. The other thing I find kind of almost paradoxical is that I'm looking a little bit to what Harry said about the stages. That's some of the developments seem to be at this awareness stage, and we see startups and they don't really get large. And then at the same time, there are things that are already pretty large that really go global. So I think in the analysis, it would be good to start classifying a little bit at least these two groups. What are these things that already really go global, and why? Why are they globally successful? How do they deliver? And then obviously, what do you learn from it? And the other is this this Brownian movement around startups, new great ideas, of which we do not yet see that they really get mainstream or go large scale. Why? Why don't they? Is it an ecosystem type of thing? The companies do not work together in the right idea. Are they targeting the wrong audience? So are they targeting the ones that want to do good rather than the ones that want to have a better price? Don't they reach into global networks that can actually do distribution? I don't know. So there is a piece of understanding that I think could be usefully brought by this project.
Okay, at the top of my head, one thing that interested me during the discussions is that on the one hand you have the people saying, okay, there's business information we might not want to share, IP sensitive, and on the other hand you have the digital people telling you, but there are digital solutions for that. So it would be interesting to have a bit of a better understanding how the technology itself, the digital technology itself, can solve the concerns that it also raises in terms of everybody will get access to my data. And so then indeed often blockchain is thrown at you, but I also understood from this morning that it's not simply the blockchain as such, but the smart contracts accompanying the blockchain technology. So I think that will be an interesting area to gain some more knowledge on. Then another thing that, and we will talk about in one of the next sessions, but what I myself find very interesting is investing in these digital technologies, for example, for tracking your product, for remote monitoring, for material passports, and so on. It requires an investment, it's costly affair, and so which are the business models that make applying these digital technologies interesting? So looking at the business side, how can you create value? Because if you have that clear, it will maybe also start happening much more without having to develop all kinds of regulations. So the business models behind. And then one small remark on the sense of urgency, which is there for circular economy and which is there for digital technology. I think that there are more examples of the two being used in combination than you might think at first sight, but it's not necessarily branded circular economy, but they're in the manufacturing and I'm sure in other sectors as well. You see a lot of companies using digital technology to track their products, to do remote monitoring, to do predictive maintenance, make sure they last as long as possible. They don't consider it as circular economy, they consider it as business as usual. So it's also, So it comes back to your remark on what should we call this,
Okay. Well, I mean, my background is that I actually am an IT engineer. So, I mean, sometimes when you listen to people with a similar kind of background from the digital technology, so it sounds like that, half of the world's problems can be solved by blockchain, and the other half can be solved by AI. So, we're all set. So, I mean, but at the same time, I do think that the idea of having this sort of a mapping of real, opportunities and gaps in the technology being applied to the circular economy issues, I think that could be much deeper. I think we are still touching very much the surface. I saw some work, for example, done by Sitra in Finland in this particular one, but again, like having the, let's say, a little bit deeper technology background, so I thought it was still fairly superficial. So I think that merits a lot of work. Then the other way around as well, I don't think that in the, let's say, the digital native industry, this whole theme is that, well,